we finally got our first teaser that the X-Men are entering into the MCU, and that came in the form of Madripoor, a city that has dealings with mutants since the beginning of its creation. So watchers, let's take a look at this fictional island nation and observe how it fits into the MCU. Madripoor first appeared in 1985's New Mutants, when the New Mutants headed to Madripoor to find out why one of their own betrayed them. Madripoor is a small island nation in the Pacific just south of Singapore and is actually akin to Singapore. In the comics, it is famous for its relation to Wolverine, especially in the 1988 comics, Marvel Comics presents Wolverine. Wolverine ended up there after all the X-Men had been presumed dead and were hiding out in Australia. In the desert outback, he met a man named Dave Chappell who he promised to help his business partner, the crime lord in Madripoor known as Tiger. After helping her defeat Roche and re-establish her as the main crime lord in Lowtown, Wolverine takes up the vigilante title of Patch and becomes a crime fighter helping out and keeping order in Madripoor. Throughout the years, it was home to many Marvel characters, including Viper, who is ruler of Madripoor at times, as well as Madam Hydra. A version of her did show up in 2014's Wolverine, although she was a mutant and a quite different character altogether. Because of this, we know that many criminal organizations had interest in Madripoor, from Hydra to the Hand. The Hand's goals with Madripoor in the comics reveal that it is actually resting on the giant dragon. On top of this, it had quite a few different dealings with mutants in general, actually housing a duplicate version of the X-Mansion for time-displaced X-Men that got stuck out of time. However, after their return to their own time, the house was eventually taken over by some Wolverine-inspired mutants and vigilantes known as Raksha. The Raksha were inspired by Wolverine, or Patch as he was known at the time. However, they were a bit more brutal and were eventually convinced by Professor X to join the X-Men, stay in the duplicate X-Mansion, and train their abilities and crime-fighting skills. So over the years, it has quite a few interactions with many Marvel heroes and villains. But the history of Madripoor itself is also quite interesting. Madripoor is most famous for its huge gap between the rich and the poor. The capital city itself is known for having some of the most expensive and fancy hotels in the world, bringing the richest tourists from around the globe. These tourists who are visiting Madripoor are always encouraged to stay in Hightown, the wealthier part of the capital city that is not only wealthy but also very high-tech, acting as a haven for the rich and powerful. They are told to stick to Hightown because in stark contrast is Lowtown, where the poorest of the poor reside, basically living in a worse than third world country within a nation that has parts that are far more luxurious than any first world nation. But on top of this, both sides of the nation house villains, pirates, and criminals, rich and poor alike. At one point in time, it was ruled by an elected chancellor and a ruling prince, but pirates and freebooters eventually took over. When this happened, a laissez-faire system replaced the old one, eventually evolving into the current economical situation that Madripoor is in, allowing just about anything to be sold, with the stipulation that it does not interrupt the status quo. On top of allowing these less than legal transactions, it also does not recognize the justice systems of other governments, as they do not allow extradition of criminals who are hiding out in Madripoor. It is a symbol of the corruption that is faced in the world, with a lot of payoffs coming through the villains and pirates that live in the borders, going through the chancellorship itself, so more and more illegal actions are allowed. It is the perfect place to hide for many of these criminal organizations and houses many international villain operations headquarters. But with all of this being said, how does this all tie into the MCU's version of Madripoor? So far, the similar is very similar to its comic book counterpart, being that it is an island city-state that has a lot of criminal activity, doesn't allow extradition, and is divided into two parts of the extremely rich and the extremely poor. Because it has only just appeared in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we will likely see this city show up again and again in the MCU, especially because by the end of the series, the power broker will probably be dethroned and someone new may take his place. And because it is such a great place for criminals to make contacts and contracts, if Zemo and the Thunderbolts does show up, they will likely be operating through Madripoor quite often. A big thing to point out in the MCU as well is that it sounds like Hydra used Madripoor as a place to hide its highest lieutenants after its fall. So Madripoor could eventually be a place of rebirth for Hydra, as well as a possible reintroduction of Madam Hydra in the MCU, and a new version that is probably Viper. But for that to happen, first Power Broker needs to be brought down. Another thing we could possibly see is the reintroduction of the Hand. Since it's still not entirely clear whether old shows are canon in the MCU, this could eventually lead up to the Hand being reintroduced or rebooted with new defenders, which would be interesting to see because it would reveal that the MCU version of Madripoor is also resting on a giant dragon. Also, this fictional city may play a part in Shang-Chi's story when it comes out later this year. And the final thing is that Madripoor seems to be the home of quite a few different people, including the Flag Smashers. And although we haven't seen any official mutants yet, we did get some hints and Easter eggs that tie to the mutants themselves, namely Wolverine. But one of the first Easter eggs, the Brass Monkey Saloon, is actually a tie-in to Captain America, as Captain America himself goes there in Captain America 363 in 1989. And they probably do this as an Easter egg in honor to the source material. But there are two other Easter eggs that I noticed that tie into mutants and Wolverine. The biggest one being a sign for the Princess Bar shows up in Lowtown as they are heading to the Brass Monkey. The Princess Bar was a favored watering hole of Wolverine, and was in a way the base of operations for Patch when he was a vigilante in Madripoor. And the other big Easter egg that didn't pan out to be an actual mutant, or at least it was never officially said, was Selby herself. In the MCU, it seems that Selby was simply the bar owner and information dealer that Zemo knew when he was trying to find the power broker to help Sam and Bucky. But in the comics, Selby was a mutant part of the Mutant Liberation Front. Although there was no actual hinting to Selby's mutant powers, perhaps later in the show we will get to see a revelation that she was a mutant. But that will be fairly difficult seeing as she is dead, likely killed by Sharon. The inclusion of Madripoor is an exciting turn for the MCU, especially with these Easter eggs hinting at the inclusion of the mutants at some point, possibly even sooner than we think. But if not, we have likely not seen the last of Madripoor, especially because in the next episode, John Walker and Lamar Hoskins will probably go to Madripoor following in Sam and Bucky's footsteps. The potential for new stories that Madripoor's inclusion in the MCU is great. So, fellow watchers, what are your thoughts on Madripoor? What future stories do you think we'll see in the MCU that include this fictional city? And do you think it will directly influence the inclusion of the mutants into the MCU? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and then like this video and subscribe to the Marvelous Wave to assemble and join our team, and have a great day.